In this lesson, we're going to get started by loading all of our footage, music, and sound effects into our editing software, and we're going to get it all roughly organized. As I mentioned before, I'm working with Avid Media Composer, so my exact process might be a little bit different than yours. Since this course is meant to teach you the art of creative editing rather than software-specific skills, it's assumed that you're going to have a pretty solid understanding of how your own editing software package works when it comes to things like importing and loading files. Alright, so let's start off by creating a project. You can name the project whatever you want, but I'm going to call mine Art of Action. We're going to make sure that it is HD, and the frame rate of the footage that we're going to be working with is 2398, so you'll want to keep it there. I'm going to keep my color space at 709, so we're going to get a little bit of extra color information. You don't really have to worry about that too much because we're not going to be doing a lot of color correction in this course. We'll be doing a little bit, but you know, if you don't have that option in your software, don't even worry about it. You can always choose RGB, not a problem. Alright, so go ahead and create the project. So I think it's important to mention why we're going to organize everything into separate folders and bins. Certainly you could just make one bin and you could dump in all of your footage and your audio and your sequences and renders and effects and everything else, and you can put it all in the same place in one big massive pile of stuff. But that's not the best way to do things, and there's two reasons. The first reason is so that later on, if you have it organized in a way that makes sense, later on you'll be able to find what you need more quickly. And the second reason is for the purpose of this course, I'm going to be referencing different files and telling you to look in a certain place to find something, and it's going to be really useful and helpful and kind of smooth things out for both of us if we have a common organization system between the two of us. Okay, so we're going to create a couple folders and bins to kind of put everything into, and we're going to start off by creating the folders. In total, we're going to make 3 of them. So I'm going to go ahead and create 3 new folders. We're going to call the first folder Cuts, and we're going to call the second folder Footage, and the third folder we're going to go ahead and call Audio. Alright, so inside these folders, we'll create some bins to hold our different source files and sequences. Within the Cuts folder, we're going to start off by creating a bin called Cuts All. Since this is a small project, we don't need to worry too much about organizing our cuts too much further than that. On a big project, we'd more than likely want to have a couple different bins for each version of our edit. But in this case, we can get away with just creating one. Put that in our Cuts folder. Alright. Now we're going to create 2 bins to go in our Footage folder. The first bin we're going to name CR_all, which stands for Camera Rolls All. And this is where the majority of our footage is going to end up going. So drag that in there. And then the second bin that we're going to create is to hold all of the shots that we'll be organizing by scene a little bit later in the course. So create a bin called SC for scene _10, because most of everything that we're going to be working with is from scene 10 of this particular short. Alright, I'm just going to go ahead and close these bins just to keep things organized. Alright, now in the audio folder, we're going to create a handful of bins. So let's start off by creating a bin to hold our music. And then we'll create a bin to hold our Foley. This is going to contain all the things like punches, kicks, cloth grabs, grunts, and things like that. Now we'll create a bin called Wild Lines. And the Wild Lines, this is where we're going to import any extra character lines that we recorded after the fight was actually filmed. And these lines are going to be used to kind of spice up the fight a little bit, as well as keep the story arc flowing throughout the fight. So we know kind of who's attacking, who's upset, who's scared, what everybody's kind of trying to accomplish during the fight. And sometimes, you know, those things get thought of after the fight is already recorded. And when you're sitting down in the editing room, you realize that you really wish you had your character say a couple things. So often we'll record them after the fact and then just go ahead and kind of sneak them into the scene. All right, and now we're going to create a folder called SFX for sound effects, free. And this is going to hold a collection of free sound effects that you're going to be able to use for editing together this scene, as well as for any other project that you might like to use them in. And last, we're going to create a bin called SFX Hi-Fi. Now, this bin is this is actually going to hold all of the really high quality sound design elements from Hi-Finesse that we're going to be able to use to sweeten our mix and add a few extra accents here and there. Now, the difference between the hi-fi sound effects and the free sound effects is that the hi-fi sound effects are only licensed for use when you're going to be working with the material in this course. You can't go ahead and use them on any other projects or commercial applications or anything like that. It's pretty much just for practice. If you are interested in using them for your personal projects, feel free to contact Hi-Finesse and you can license them just like you would, any other professional cue. All right, so now that we have a good folder and bin structure set up in our editing program, we can go ahead and get all of the footage and audio loaded up into the bins. So I have them located on my desktop here, so I'm going to go ahead and open it all up. You got your audio, your footage, and your lesson resources. So here within the audio folder, you can see that you got your Foley, music, sound effects free, sound effects hi-fi, and your wild lines. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to start dragging all this into the Avid here. All right, great. So we have all of our audio elements loaded in: Foley, music, sound effects free, sound effects hi-fi, and wild lines. So now in the camera rolls all folder, we'll go ahead and open that up. And now we'll go ahead and we'll import all of the footage. Okay, great. And now we got all the camera rolls loaded in. So this is the first lesson where you'll have a homework assignment to complete before moving on to the next lesson. If you haven't already, go ahead and finish importing all the footage and the audio into the proper bins and folders in your editing software. In the next lesson, we're actually going to take a little bit of time and we're going to look through some of the raw footage that we just imported and check out some of the shots and the content that we're going to be working with. See you in a bit. So now that we've loaded all of our exercise files into our editing program, we're going to take a closer look at the footage that we'll be working with. As you can see in the CR_all bin, the footage is broken down by camera roll. So what exactly is a camera roll? Originally, the term camera roll specifically referred to a roll of film used in the camera. Each one was assigned a letter and a number to keep track of all the footage as it was being shot. Now, however, with so many productions being filmed digitally, the term camera roll has taken on a slightly different meaning to reflect the changes in technology. Since most digital cameras now use memory cards or even hard drives instead of actual film stock, the term camera roll has simply become kind of a general way to label and categorize batches of footage. A lot of times now, productions will label each new memory card that's been filled up with footage with a different camera roll number. For this course, we've supplied you with 31 camera rolls. Now, within each camera roll are a couple of scenes and a bunch of takes of each scene. You'll find that you have many different ways to cut together this fight with all the footage that was filmed. Alright, so let's take a look at one of our camera rolls. I'm going to go ahead and load up camera roll A25. And you can follow along in your software if you like, or you can just watch. So, in this camera roll, just by scrubbing through, you can quickly see that there are a couple of different scenes and takes. The camera rolls contained in this course will range in length from about 25 seconds all the way up to about 20 minutes, and almost all of them will contain more than one scene or take. Now, the footage is going to start with the couple, Dan and Erica, interacting with the thugs in the alley, it's not going to include all of the story setup of both groups of people kind of walking down the main street before they intersect. We're doing it this way because the purpose of this course is to learn to cut action and learn to cut this fight scene, and dialogue editing and parallel editing aren't really the focus of the course, so we're not going to pay attention to that right now. I should also point out that not every single take from the shoot is included in these exercise files. Providing every single shot from the raw footage would have basically just created more work for you to do when looking through and organizing the footage. So we took the time to choose a handful of takes from each shot, each with a bit of variation. This way, you won't have to spend too long breaking down your shots before you can start editing, and you'll still have plenty of options to choose from when crafting your fight scene. Okay, so you probably also noticed that the scenes and takes are professionally slated just as you'd expect from any well-organized production. I'd like to take a quick moment to just review the information contained on the film slates that you're going to be working with. Now, most of you are probably already comfortable reading slates, but for some of you, this may still be a bit confusing. Either way, it's always helpful to have a quick refresher since each production will label their scenes and takes differently. Film slates provide quite a bit of useful information about each shot. They contain things like the camera roll, the scene number, the take, and some production information like the name of the movie, the production company, the director, the DP, and the shoot date. You're also probably going to see a handful of other pieces of information that some directors choose to include on the slate and others don't, such as the frame rate, time code, and shot-specific information like whether it's an interior, an exterior, a day shot, or a night shot. So let's take a look at these three slates and review the labeling system used for our footage. In this first example, we have a shot from camera roll A14, scene 10B, and take 1. So what's this tell us? Well, it tells us that this is the 14th roll, or batch, of footage shot with the A camera, and that it's the first take of scene 10B. We'll use this information to organize the shots in our bins a bit later in preparation for the editing process. Let's take a look at a couple more examples. Alright, now in this second example, we have a shot that was filmed from the B camera on the set. You can tell that by the camera roll. This is the 5th batch of footage shot with the B camera, and it contains the 6th take of scene 10D. Many productions will use multiple cameras to capture the action from more than one angle as it's happening. This is really useful when you want to maintain really accurate continuity across various actions in the scene. So when you're cutting together two angles that were shot at the same time but by different cameras, you know that they're identical and they'll sync up perfectly since they're recordings of the same exact moment but from different angles. Okay, so in this last example, we have something that's actually a little bit confusing. The scene and take make sense, but the camera roll designation on the slate is weird. It says that this is the slate for both camera roll A25 and camera roll B11. What we have here is a slate that's serving dual purpose, as the slate for both an A camera and a B camera. So likely what happened here was that the A and B cameras were positioned fairly closely to each other and were capturing similar enough angles of the action that it made sense to have them both record the shot information from the same physical slate, or clapperboard. You can see that if we load up the camera roll B listed on this slate, camera roll B11, it's obviously the same moment as camera roll A25. If these two cameras were in drastically different locations instead, there would have needed to have been two different slates being held by different people on the set, one for each of them. Slating the shots in this way with a dual-purpose slate speeds things up sometimes, and probably saves the director and crew some time on set, which is really important on an expensive production. Unfortunately though, for us editors, it can sometimes create a little bit of confusion. When working with some of the footage in this course, you'll run across a handful of slates that are dual slated for both A and B cameras. And like we said, this is not uncommon in action scenes.
So how do we know if the slate is actually from the A camera or the B camera? Well, in this particular case, we really don't. Ultimately though, it doesn't even matter. When we start subclipping out the takes and organizing our footage, we'll be labeling our shots by scene and take only. As far as which camera they come from, all we really need to know in this case is whether the shot is a close-up shot, a medium close, or a wide shot. And we're going to label each take within our bins accordingly. So don't worry about this too much right now. We're going to go into a lot more detail about this later in the course. Alright, so in this section, we took a look at the video footage that we're going to be working with, and we learned a bit about how it's currently organized. Coming up, we'll continue by reviewing the sound effects and the music included with this course. Alright, I'll see you in a bit. In this section, we're going to quickly browse through some of the sound effects and music we'll be using in this course. The 850 plus sound effects and music cues we're giving you to work with fall into two main categories. First, we have the free stuff. The free audio elements include a ton of fight sound effects and Foley, and also a bunch of basic sound design elements like whooshes, rises, drones, and so on. These cues are 100% free to use for anything you might need, whether it's just working on this course or even in a commercial project in a professional setting. These totally free cues that don't need to be licensed make up about 95% of the audio clips we're giving you to work with. Which brings us to the pay stuff. The pay audio files include a few different music cues as well as a good selection of additional pieces of sound design. These are high-end pieces of sound design and music created by one of our great partners, High Finesse Music and Sound. Just like the free stuff, any of these tracks can also be used when working on this course, and just for general learning and practice. But please don't distribute them or use them in any sort of professional or commercial project without first licensing them. You'll be able to tell which cues are from the High Finesse library because they're labeled with Hi-Fi in the name. Alright, so I'm just going to quickly open up each of these audio bins. Got our Foley, our music, our free sound effects, our hi-fi sound effects, and our wild lines. And I'm just going to drop them all over here, put them all in tabs. Alright, so you can see in the Foley here, we have things like air whooshes for when like an arm or a leg is traveling through the air quickly. Something that sounds like this. We have lots of different punches with and without whooshes attached to them. Breaks. We have light punches, heavy punches for all different types of scenarios. We have, scroll down here a little bit, lots of different human vocalizations. So we have grunts for after a character is hit. And we also have grunts for when somebody is exerting effort, like before a punch is thrown or before a move is executed. Sometimes they sound a little bit similar, but they're all going to be helpful depending on the situation. Kick sound effects, face slaps, feet scuffling on the ground. We have coughing, which is really useful after somebody's been knocked out and they may be laying around on the ground. Add a little bit of coughing to your sound layers, and it kind of gives the impression that they're not doing so good, and they're kind of trying to recover from whatever impact that they just took. Clothing, rustling, as fighters are moving around quickly. Cloth grabs, bone breaks, body hits, and I think that's about it. Yeah, some blocks. All right, so moving on to the music, we have 3 music cues that we're giving you to work with here in the course. I believe that too many options can sometimes be a bad thing, so I try to kind of narrow it down to 3 cues that'll give you a very different fight scene depending on which one you use. And that's not to say you even have to use music. You can make a very effective fight scene just with drones and other sound design elements and keep it a little bit more au naturel. We have the hi-fi sound effects in here. These are things like rises. Add that to sweeten a punch. Lots of drones. bunch of hits in here, some stingers, which is kind of like a whoosh and a hit all mixed together, and a couple other things that are going to be pretty handy. So feel free to look through all those, and we'll definitely dive more into that once we get to the sound design part of the course. And you know what? I'm going to skip over Wild Lines for a second and just go to look at the sound effects free. So here we have obviously a lot more sound effects than we have in the hi-fi library. And like I said before, these are all free to use for this project or for any other project. And there's a pretty good variety of them. Lots of hits, lots of whooshes, a couple rises. And it's just going to, if you want to organize these a little bit further, or if you want to go listen to them and kind of wrap your mind around what they have to offer, it's not a bad idea just to kind of establish some of your favorites. But we'll definitely be going into some detail about some of my favorites once we get to that point. All right, and then the wild lines. And these are lines that we recorded after the fight was already filmed to kind of spice it up a little bit and create a little bit more atmosphere and character involvement throughout the scene. So you can see you got people kind of cursing at each other. You got lots of kind of trepidation and scared vocalizations from Erica that we recorded. And just general character interactions that are going to be kind of enriching for the scene. We definitely have plenty of variety to cover just about anything we want to do with our scene. And as you could probably tell, the quality of this audio is very high, which is an absolute requirement when you want to create a professional mix. Coming up, we're going to look at a sneak preview of what the final scene is going to look like after we're done editing it. See you in a bit.